Hi, everyone. Today we're going to talk about the problems caused by urbanization. I've got a little slideshow, and you've got a note here to fill in as you go through the lesson. Um, all this, of course, is available on the website, so you might want to go back and go through it, the actual slideshow, instead of just watching the video. Before I get into to problems with urbanization, I thought I'd just highlight a couple of images from the early lockdown of COVID-19 and the impact the lockdown had on urban places. So, if you take a look, this is a place in India, and on the right here, that's what it looked like uh, on a normal day with the air pollution. And because so many people were staying home and so few people were going to work and using cars, they could actually see the Himalayan mountains from here because the air quality had cleaned up so much. Uh, there's a great video here. I'm not going to play it for you, but go through the slideshow, and it's an amazing view of Paris, which is the most popular tourist destination on the planet, and just amazing to see how barren it was during COVID. The other thing is wildlife. With people not walking around and cars not driving around, we started seeing a lot more wildlife in our cities. Just down the street from us in Eden, we've got a coyote pack of what is it? Four adults and three young pups that live about 3 blocks down the street from us, and they're commonly seen now. They became very brazen during COVID, and just have kept up that pattern of behavior. Other places in the world, it's really neat. You should check out the video. Remember that livable communities and sustainable communities can be the same. You've got a city like, for instance, Portland, Oregon, considered to be one of the most livable cities in all of the United States, and they have a very strong focus on sustainability. The key thing is they put a limit on the size of their city, and they said, okay, that's all the land you're going to have. Figure out, developers, how to manage that land, but you're not going to use any more forests, natural places, agricultural land to build box stores and all that sort of stuff. They did a great job of increasing the amount of public transit, reducing the size of lots so that you can fit more homes in the same amount of area, and redeveloping areas that aren't being used. That's one thing that our city really needs to do. You'll notice over by the hospital, where the old hospital was, they tore that building down and are rebuilding there. And just down the street, the old Meadowvale School was torn down and made into a residential neighborhood. So we have some good examples of redevelopment, but more and more cities need to look at redeveloping instead of going out and grabbing fresh land from the farmers. This is a graph that I'm going to talk about in class, and what it's showing is the difference between urban and the rural population. Urban are people who live in towns or cities, and rural live in villages or out in agricultural areas or in remote regions like forested regions or far north. And what you can see is that by and large, the overall population in Canada, only 20% lives in the rural areas, and the vast majority of us are a bunch of city slickers living in towns and cities. But the distribution is not even across Canada. We have some really heavily populated provinces like Ontario and Quebec, and you can see that they are very urban. But our Atlantic provinces, you can see this cluster right here, Newfoundland, PEI, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, they tend to have a greater rural population. They have a lot of roots in fishing, and a lot of people live in these small coastal villages, and hence would be considered to be part of the rural population. Likewise, with our territories over here, we can see that the vast majority, or a good chunk of people in the territories, don't live in the big communities, but live spread out. Now, if we were to look way back in 1800, what do you think it would look like? Well, I'm hoping that you would say that this would be flipped. Most people were living off the land and were farmers, miners, forestry people, even trappers at that time. And not a lot of people lived in our communities. places like Toronto, Ottawa were very, very small communities back then. So there's been a real shift as people. Well, the key thing is the invention of the tractor. The invention of the tractor meant that we just didn't need a lot of people to work on farms anymore, and the tractor could also be used for logging trees and so on. So we just didn't need that manual labor, and so people went to the cities where factories needed lots of workers to make this new thing called tractors and automobiles. And around the late 1800s, we started seeing a big shift from rural to urban areas. So if we take a look in our own community here, there's this great the Earth Engine time lapse by Google, and it's going to zoom into different areas, but we're going to just find Grimsby here, Grimsby, Ontario, and the great thing is that we can go forward and back in time using this Google time lapse. So it's going to zoom in on good old Grimsby in Niagara. And it's zooming through this pretty fast. I don't know if I can, yeah, I can move this up. And I guess I can only get it to go at half speed. So let's go back in time here. 1984, there we go. So if we look at Grimsby, which, where are we here? See this little bump that comes out here? That's Beamer Conservation Area, the big part of the escarpment that's popping out. And if you can see the town site here, all right, there's the town site, and you see very little up on top of the Niagara Escarpment. We have a smaller community down below. So let's roll forward in time, and what we're going to see, oh, I'll just stop it here. See these brown patches of land? So those are agricultural lands being converted into residential properties. So they basically dig everything up, put down the foundations, and you can see the rapid urbanization as the farmland gets paved over here. So we stop again. You can see this line right here, this road right here, and this road right here. Those were the previous boundaries, and we can see it reaching out well beyond those roads. Here we are in 2017. There's the old boundary there, and we can see all this new development and all this new development over here. And this is a pattern of a lot of our communities in Niagara. They grow into agricultural areas and pave it over, and that means less available land for food, and a lot less natural spaces. So Grimsby was a small town on track to become a big. It's on track to become a big city. What changes might happen as it continues to grow? We'll talk about this in class, but I'm just going to quickly summarize it here. I'm going to let you read through that. Economic is basically anything to do with creating jobs, businesses, and so on. Social is basically how people interact with each other. And finally, environmental changes is self-evident. So I'll let you read through that and include that in your notes. So there's a lot of pluses and minuses to a growing city. So the big question is should we allow Grimsby to continue to grow? And what land would we want to preserve, and what land should we allow to develop? So I'll just go back here. Not sure if I can go back. Here we are. So the key thing is this land down below the escarpment that's closest to the lake, that is the best land in all of Canada. It's only 1%, well, less than 1% of all of Canada can grow crops like you can in the fruit belt, which is that narrow area between the escarpment and the lake. Anything above over here, it's not so great. The climate is just enough different from down below that you can't grow grapes, you can't grow a lot of the tender fruits like plums and cherries and so on. Because what happens is that Lake Ontario acts as a big bathtub during the summer, soaking up the heat. And In the fall, it takes a long time to lose that heat. So all that warm air gets sort of stuck between the escarpment and the lake. And so this little strip here stays warmer than it should. So crops can grow longer and the grapes can grow to full maturity. Whereas if you're on top of the escarpment, you don't have that blocking capability of the cliffside there. And you're not as close to the lake, and as a result, you just can't grow crops for quite as long. So if Grimsby is going to grow, I would suggest build up here. Don't build down on the really good stuff. All right. So unfortunately, they've done a lot of that, but the what's that called? The Greenbelt is stopping it. It's going to prevent any more development in these rural areas here. You can see as we get closer to St. Catharines. Um, the hospital is sort of the end line that right here. This area will eventually get infilled, but everything in this area here should stay the way it is. So one of the key problems with urbanization is flooding. What happens is you take a forested area where most of the precipitation is going to be trapped by the trees and lower story vegetation, which means that the rain takes a long time to get to any sort of river or to pond on the ground. Once we start cutting away that, you can see, whoops, we can see that a lot more is going directly into runoff, and very little is making it into the ground. And if we really heavily urbanize the area, we can see the runoff number being really high here. So you're going to, have these flash floods. Suddenly the river goes up by 3 or 4 feet, sometimes upwards of 10 feet if you have a heavy rainfall. And places like Toronto, even St. Catharines, have flooded very quickly when we have heavy rainfalls because we just are not trapping this precipitation anymore. Those residents that have purchased rain barrels, this is one thing that the city of St. Catharines has done is try to give out cheap rain barrels to everyone in order to trap that rainwater. So instead of it running off your house and onto your grass and then into the streets, it's being captured in those rain barrels. I've got 4 of them myself. And that really helps stop this problem. If everybody had rain barrels, we'd have less of a flooding issue. The other thing that the city of St. Catharines has done is they have created artificial wetlands. So if you are by the intersection of QEW and Ontario Street and you look off to the side, there's a little by the Capri Hotel there, there's an artificial wetland in there. In fact, it's been so successful, there's lots of turtles in it. And basically all the runoff from the highway area goes into that pond and gets stored there, slowly evaporates instead of causing flooding. So I've mentioned about the Greenbelt legislation. I'll let you read through that, but the whole purpose of it is to preserve agricultural land. The key thing about the Greenbelt is it's basically made up of a couple of different sections. So this is one of the reasons why we use Google Maps and not we use ArcGIS and not Google Maps, because we can turn layers of information on and off. So the Greenbelt is comprised of, first of all, the Niagara Escarpment. This is this beautiful stretch of cliffside that goes all the way from Niagara Falls all the way up to Tobermory. It's sort of the nature superhighway for Ontario. It runs north-south, so it allows lots of things to migrate along this area. In fact, we've seen black bears down in Burlington because they've basically picked up this natural area and have come down, and they don't have to worry so much about traffic and so on. We also have the Oak Ridges Moraine, which is this big hilly area north of Toronto. It's really important because when there's rainfall, it lands on this really sandy area, and it naturally filters the water, and that water eventually goes down into Toronto's water supply. So to destroy this would be to ruin Toronto's water supply. The last part is the agricultural area. So all this green area is the really good agricultural land. It's not all the super quality stuff we have down here, but nevertheless, this is agricultural land that we want to protect. So together, all of this make up the Greenbelt, and you cannot convert this land into residential property. It has to stay as a natural area, or as a agricultural land. Now, some farmers like it. The key thing here is that if it's agricultural land, then that means that the value of the land will be less. So if you're a farmer and you want to buy more land to expand production, it's more affordable for you to buy your neighbor's property if they're retiring and want to get rid of their property. It also means that you're going to pay less taxes because it's agricultural land. If it's worth like $10 million, then your taxes are going to be ridiculous. And if it's only worth $600,000, then your taxes is far more reasonable. On the other side of the coin, if you're a farmer that have children that have no intention of taking over the farm, you might hate it because you're thinking about, oh my goodness, I live right on the edge of St. Catharines, and I'd like to sell this land and make a fortune. All of us will be rich, live happily ever after. Well, the thing is you're going to be able to sell it, make some good money, but you're not going to make as much money if it's just to be used as agricultural land. If it could be switched over to residential, you'd make a lot more money. So there's some people that say, well, in fact, our provincial government was talking about, well, maybe we should take some chunks out of the Greenbelt and let it be converted to residential property because those cities can't grow any further like St. Catharines. And because we can't grow any further, you know, there's fewer and fewer places to build a house, so the price is going to go up. So if you could open up more land for development, then that would drive prices down. It's very short-term thinking, and fortunately, all of the city councilors that our class interviewed during the last election promised that they would not attempt to use the Greenbelt land for development. So that's it for this lesson. Tune in for future lessons. If you have any questions, feel free to send me an email.